Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqanda.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. We have a conversation with Dr. David Feinstein. David is a clinical psychologist who has received 9 national awards for his books on consciousness and healing. He has served as a facilitator at Antioch College and the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. He and his wife, Donna Eden, have built one of the world's largest and most vibrant organizations teaching energy medicine. They are the co-authors of the brand new book, Tapping. As part of the raffle, we have multiple copies of Tapping that you are going to get a chance to win. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the 24-hour tapping stage, my friend, David Feinstein. So one of the things that I have been wrestling a lot with as I've been thinking of tapping and I've been thinking of transformation is, for the longest time, I thought of tapping as an approach. And recently, what I've come to a realization of is tapping is a tool that has multiple different approaches. If I'm going to use the tool set for emotional first aid so I feel better in the moment, I might have one approach to it. If I'm trying to heal a trauma, deal with a limiting belief, something like that, each one of those things is going to be different. And for me, that's been really, really useful because it's given me the opportunity to have different ways of thinking about the tapping and the transformation that I want to do in the moment when I'm working with myself and when I'm working with clients. And so as I was reading through you and Donna's most recent book on tapping, I was really, really fascinated by this idea of these guiding models that we have in our subconscious mind that are not just
Yes.
about how I feel in this particular moment, but it's about how I understand the world. And so I would love to hear in your words what you mean by that, and what's the implication that has on not only how we navigate the world, but how we navigate transformation. And we can kind of dive into that through the course of the conversation. But I just love, as an opening salvo, kind of what are you thinking or what are you talking about when you're using that vocabulary?
Well, we started the book with chapter 1 talking about guiding models. And the reason was that we were trying to figure out, okay, what does tapping really do? How does it change things? And what it changes is the way that the person perceives reality and makes sense of reality, makes sense of what they perceive. And that is governed by guiding models. And for me, it was very interesting because my first book was called Personal Mythology. And that was all about the personal myths that people hold. And these myths are very deeply ingrained in their perceptions, in their emotional structure, and in their way of thinking. And so it was like coming back to that 1988 book, which I really loved, but and it was actually it in its first edition, it sold 50,000 copies, which for that kind of book was a bestseller. Joseph Campbell wrote an endorsement for it, so it was really a big deal in my life. But the field of psychology did not embrace it because mythology is falsehood. Mythology is primitive, it's ancient, it's not modern, it's not scientific. And so because of using that term, it never took off beyond the circles that it took off in. So I kind of abandoned that as I got into energy psychology and found that energy psychology is really fast and wonderful. But what I did was I began in my personal mythology workshops to bring energy psychology into it. So there are 5 stages by which a personal myth develops, by which it evolves, and that's true for guiding models as well, because they're the same thing. And it's not so different from mainstream, because that's what cognitive structures are that the cognitive therapists are working with. It's not like this is a new idea, but it's an idea that has been used in with many different terms. And life structure. There's I think in the book I have about a dozen different terms of that are talking about the same thing. And what I think, like in the personal mythology model, each of the stages has its own challenges, and you can use tapping to move through that stage more harmoniously and with less difficulty. So the first stage is when there is a conflict between your personal myths or your guiding models. So you've grown up as a good boy, and you really have this whole structure around doing well, pleasing others. And then you reach a certain point in your maturity where that's not enough, where that doesn't work. And it actually, in people's lives, those old myths break down with symptoms, with disappointment, with sadness, with anger, with anxiety, when they're breaking down, and a new myth emerges that opposes the old myth. And it's not necessarily better, but it's different. And then what happens in the second, so in the first stage, what you can do is you can look at the roots of that old myth that's no longer working. And you can tap on all the trauma or anxiety or sadness that is involved with the history of that. Because if you're a good boy, you really learned that you get punished for not being a good boy. And so how did that affect your self-esteem? So you can begin to work at that level. The second stage is where these two opposing forces come into dialogue. And that happens naturally. It happens in the psyche. It's not something that you necessarily do consciously or willfully, but it happens spontaneously, and it will happen in dreams. It will happen in seeing contradictions where you are headed in one direction with your intention, but something comes up that sabotages that. And that's usually the counter myth coming up. So you can tap on embracing the conflict rather than fighting it or siding with one part or the other part. Sometimes people, spiritual bypass, where people decide, okay, I'm going to be spiritual now. So they begin to take on the trappings of being spiritual without doing the work to clear themselves. So to really embrace both sides of that conflict is another thing that you can tap on. You can really tap on that, even though I want to be a good boy and my impulses go in a different direction, I deeply love and accept myself. That sort of thing. In the third stage, it's a resolution of the opposing guiding models, so that now, rather than fighting one another, you're beginning to allow the best of each to come in, and you're able to recognize the best of each and really begin to develop a model that will take you forward into your life in a new way. And the fourth stage is really embracing that model, really saying, yes, this is something that is important for me to do, and I will absolutely commit myself to this. And so it's a commitment stage, and tapping can help with that a lot as you begin to imagine acting out of the new model that you just kind of engineered, acting out of it, and imagine how successful you will be. And maybe it's a 3 on the believability scale that you could actually do that. And so then you use the tapping to investigate what's in the way of being able to really embody the new direction, the new model, the new personal myth. And then the final stage is to translate that model into the specifics of your everyday life. And again, in the way that you can use tapping to break old habits and establish new ones, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's where the personal myth enters your life. And so those 5 stages by which personal myths develop are also the stages by which guiding models develop without the baggage of a word that makes scientists kind of, get uncomfortable. So in a way, it doesn't feel new to me, but what is new is really, really claiming tapping as the at the forefront. And then as the book goes on, it doesn't necessarily talk that much about guiding models, but you have already established that that's what we're changing, are the guiding models that move the person forward.
And so as you say that, like, and thinking this through, like one of the kind of phrases that I came to in my work a couple of years ago is, in order for us to change, I either need to change the way I see myself, the way I see the world, or both. And
Exactly.
so, and so as you're talking about, particularly in those first 4 stages that you're talking about, that feels like very, very much internal work. How I
Yes.
see myself, what is possible, what's rising inside of me. What does that then look like when we are starting to embrace that particular thing, but we continue to be in a cultural context, be it my family, my workplace, my spiritual upbringing, my culture, my ethnicity, my something that is then resistant to that, because a lot of those ideas that we build come from that. And as I ask this question, I actually think about from the energy event a couple of years ago, where Dr. T said, this is the process of decolonizing our mind. Like, part of that transformation is letting go of these stories. I need to be a good boy, which I might have chosen or it might have been pushed upon me. What does it then look like when, as you said, the rubber meets the road, where I'm now inside of systems that have mythologized me or have put me into a little box and says, this is the way Gene is supposed to act, and I start acting differently inside of that? What does that look like, and what does our work look like at that moment?
Yeah. Well, by the time you get to there, if you've really done the inner work,
Mm-hmm.
then you're able to rub your sore spots and say, even though the world wants me to still be a good boy,
Mm-hmm.
I deeply love and accept myself, and I choose to move forward independently. So you focus on whatever the blocks are, whether they're internal blocks or external blocks.
And so, how do we then, for some people, kind of that self-awareness that you were talking about? I define myself this way. I have this new disposition rising. I can see that. How do we do a better job of recognizing those stories that we have written about ourselves and how we fit into the world? Because I think, like, the word that you used very, very early on was this idea of perceiving how we work and how the world works. And I think that word perceive is accurate because it's an interpretation. We're taking these models and we're interpreting, and my subconscious mind is not going, this is a perception. My subconscious mind, these models are going, this is the way the world works. And it's operating as if it is true. How then, like, what is the process looking like where I'm trying to, in those early stages, identifying the frameworks, these guiding models that I have created or have been given to me about myself and the world? Like, how do we become reflective and recognize what those stories are so we can start to decide if they're useful or not?
Yes. Marcel Proust said, to wisdom and goodness, we only make promises, we obey pain. And it's when those guiding models start to hurt that we
Okay.
start to really pay attention to them. And what a more skillful way of working with that pain is to recognize that there's something that's breaking down and to allow that breaking down rather than to fight it. So that's why the even though part of the
Right.
acceptance statement, the setup statement is so important, is that you're able to really focus in on what you want to hold on to and acknowledge that what you want to hold on to is something that is from the past. It's something that is holding you back. And life provides lots of opportunity for pain. Yeah, life gives us lots of opportunity to learn through pain.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes of course it's somatic, it's physical pain, but often it's the pain of anxiety or self-doubt or the pain of just feeling like life isn't right now. And so you can't. What I love, one of the things I love about tapping is that you not only get the insight, you have something you can do with the insight that shifts the whole inner architecture around the guiding model so that you are able to embrace what it is that is forcing itself through to help you grow, another damned opportunity to grow, as a friend of mine used to put it. But so the tapping is so flexible. That's one of the hallmarks of the approach. Depending on the words you use, the images, the memories, you can go in any direction. You can go heal the past, make the present richer, really embed new directions for the future.
And so one of the things I like inside of that is, once is an anomaly, twice is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. And so, and my friend Catherine Poole, medical intuitive, used to say, first the universe throws feathers, then it throws elephants. And this idea that when we have a sense of discomfort, be it something that's physical in the body, be it something that's emotional, where it's a persistent emotion, or like you're saying, that sense of dissatisfaction, like for us being aware when something starts to persist, it gives us the opportunity to ask the questions. And I guess there's even some fault in the way that I ask the question, because one of the things that it's been coming out a lot in the conversations over the course of the 24 hours that we're doing and recognizing my own life is so often we're like trying to define the problem and define the solution so we can get it right away in a single step. And I'm open to instantaneous, amazing transformation. I've seen it in my own life. I've seen it in the life of my clients. But what you're talking about here is a process. And, one of my favorite phrases to tap on is I appreciate the fact this is a process, and I'm frustrated by the fact that it always has to be a process as I'm going through this particular thing. And what you're doing is by talking about it in this way, and you know me, I love a system and I love a process, that it gives us the ability to go, okay, this is going to be something that is stepwise that I'm going through. This is what's arising. I'm paying attention to what's rising. I'm hearing the information behind the emotion of the physical pain. And I'm finding out, do I believe the story that it's telling and why it is existing? I feel uncomfortable at work because I don't feel appreciated. Okay, well, what proof do I have that I'm not actually appreciated at work? And maybe it is that I'm not appreciated at work. Maybe it's an echo from somewhere else, and this is just the venue that's giving me a chance to step into that. But giving ourselves permission to step through it as a process as we're healing, and also not necessarily knowing what we're going to look like on the other side. The first step is, oh, the suit that I'm wearing no longer fits. The definition that I'm giving my life no longer fits. That doesn't mean I have to know what fits yet. I just get a chance to explore why it doesn't fit, and information's going to unfold inside of that.
Yes, very, very good. I think, it keeps coming back to until you accept what's happening, until you accept what it is that you want to change,
Yeah.
it's going to be very hard to change it because the part of you will hold on stronger and stronger as you're trying to shove it away.
And there's, at least my experience and an unscientific one, like my experience is if my subconscious had its way, I would stay embedded in amber and have nothing unpredictable and nothing change for the
Mhm.
rest of my existence because it perceives that's the easiest way for me to be safe.
Yeah.
And so, in addition to some of those external pressures that I was asking you about earlier, I'm guessing there is an internal pressure that there's a part of us that wants to resist exploring and doing something new and wants to continue to hold on to these guiding models. Is that an accurate experience or is that just the lived experience inside of my own head?
No, I think that's really accurate. I think safety versus growth is
Hmm.
one of the real dynamics in all of our psyches, is that we want to be safe. We want to feel comfortable. We want things to be predictable. And there's a part that gets stagnant with that, the part that just doesn't, it loses its aliveness, loses its vitality. And the psyche is well equipped because it's sending out parts that are already um, begging for growth. So you've got this kind of scale between safety and growth, and you really need to respect both sides of it. As soon as you really kind of embrace the growth part too much, the safety part is going to fight you. It's not going to go along with it. And as long as you embrace the safety part too much, the growth part is going to kick you in the pants. So so it's a life. It's always a balance between safety and growth. That's Abe Maslow was the first person that really spelled that out in a way that made sense to me.
And as you say that, so one of my daily practices is the first thing I do when I wake up is I have a team meeting. And I imagined that I am a giant factory or a giant business that have all of these different parts, and parts are in charge of digestion and respiration, but they're also in charge of growth and all of those sorts of things. And I literally imagine a giant conference room in the middle of my forehead at the beginning of the day with this magnificent view out these windows. And the safety and this growth, for me, the way they show up at that meeting is research and development and legal. And both of those things are essential to a business. Research and development, we want the company to grow, we want to move forward. Legal, we want to stay safe and we don't want to do something stupid out in the world that jeopardizes us. And so for me, I'm constantly having those two parts engage with each other in a, hey, we're on the same team. Hey, we want what's best for Gene. And we've really different dispositions in the way that we understand that. And so for
Yeah,
me, like it's a daily practice for me tuning into those two particular parts because I know exactly what you're like, where if one is too far ahead of the other, the growth part's going to push me out in front of the traffic, or the safety part's going to keep me anchored and I'm not going to move forward at all. And neither of those things are healthy and good for me. That I'm actually better when both of them are showing up in contrast.
those are great metaphors.
And so as we're doing this work and as we're thinking about it, the other thing that I gravitated to, and I have it right here in front of me, is the cognitive distortions table. And I was introduced to very, very similar ideas of this when I studied NLP years and years ago. And for me, like as just a helper in the world and as a practitioner, what it's got me to do is it's gotten me to listen to the vocabulary that people use, because I have found that we emotionally respond to the world the way that we describe it. And so if I say everybody at work hates me, I'm going to walk in emotionally in a very, very particular way. And so when I have someone say that to me, I just, everyone? And like, okay, no, it's just blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And you can immediately see this emotional shift by getting a more accurate description of what's going on. So I would love to hear your take, how you came to this list, what you think about, what these cognitive distortions are, and then how we respond to them as transformational people and as tapping people inside of that.
Right. Well, cognitive distortions, of course, have been really studied by the cognitive behavior therapy people, and they are natural. That is, when in terms of the guiding models we've been talking about, the guiding models are a process. They are evolving. So every experience we have kind of shapes them a little bit, and it actually every experience we have has a neurological substrate, so that they're not just ideas out there somewhere. These are actually embedded in your neurology, and so you have an experience, and there was an emotion that was part of that experience that was really unpleasant, and you don't really know how to make sense of that emotion, and then it gets put into the guiding model. So it might be that the guiding model now is making a distortion that whatever the situation was is not safe, or is in some way not desirable. So the guiding model just developed by experience on top of experience on top of experience. And when there are some patterns, they really become a clear, strong part of the guiding model, but they're not necessarily tied to reality. They're tied to what your experience was when you were 8, or when you were 10, or when you were 12. And so as those experiences build into more and more complex guiding models, they often have at their root some distortions. And so now everything that gets on top of it has similar distortions. So now you're scared not only of a teacher criticizing you, you're scared of your wife criticizing you, you're scared of your kids criticizing you, you're scared. So so what EFT can do is it can go all the way back to the roots of that and begin to change those distorted beliefs, and one at a time. But it's very effective for changing distorted beliefs. So you just bring that belief in, and you bring in some evidence about the distortion, and then pretty soon, boom, you're back to the original experience that had shaped that really conceived that belief. And then you are able to tap on the emotional residue of that experience.
And what I find I love about what you're saying inside of that is it's the way we're building an understanding of the world in the way we interpret what's going on. And so particularly when we're young, there's two problems with that. Number one is sample size. The younger I am, the less experience I have. And if I only have 2 data points, which might be, 1 in 50 chances of those things showing up, I've now taken 2% of the lived experience and turned it into all the lived experience because I just happen to have those 2 times because of the sample size. But the other piece is the interpretation piece. A couple of weeks ago, I did a weekend event with a bunch of my students, and all we did was we explored the times as children in which we were told we were too something. Too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too dramatic, too whatever. And so I am a child making noise, and my parent is on the phone, and they're like, Gene David, be quiet. You're being too loud. Because in that moment, I am being too loud for parent to have the conversation. Where it's very easy for me to take that experience and build a model of going, oh, when I am loud, the person who is committed to taking care of me rejects me because I'm being something I'm not supposed to be. And so all of a sudden, I have created this model that says being loud is something that is dangerous because my caretaker isn't going to take care of me, because I've distorted the experience into a rule because of my interpretation, because I don't know what's going on. And like you were talking about there, like finding it at work and then finding what's going on and tracing it back, all of a sudden we can land at that moment where we're able to go, oh, that's a distortion. I misunderstood this and turned being loud into an all or nothing proposition. If I'm loud, I'm going to be in trouble and I'm going to be in danger. And so, and so for me, like as I was reading this, like the thing that was most exciting for me is it's like, oh, there's a very clear roadmap for transformation inside of this. It's not just about changing my externalities, but it's like, let me find the model that is describing the world and is describing myself in this moment, that is creating my emotional response to what is going on. Once I find that model, I can now interrogate that model. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it useful today? Because I think the other thing that happens with some of these models is I could have a model that is now just outdated. As a child, I could have had a bipolar parent, and being quiet was actually was a model that kept me safe. Because if I kept my head down, I didn't have to worry about flying shoes or flying words, which was the perfect model when I was 6 in a house where I didn't have control, which is a less perfect model when I'm 46 and I'm in the office and I want to share what's going on, but I'm still playing small in that particular way. And so I love the fact that this is just like even before I know what the model is, the fact that I know that, oh, all I need to do is find that piece of programming and update it into something that is more useful. Like for me, that's a liberating thing to know that transformation is more possible. And it's not just this black box of, boy, I hope I tap on the exact right thing. So as you were going through this, one of my experiences creating content, even when I sit down with a clear plan, is I learn a lot when I'm forced to take implicit ideas and make them explicit, or ideas that I talk about all the time casually with clients and answering questions. And I'm going, no, I need to make this clear and definitive so someone can just consume it as they go through it. What were the things that you learned that surprised you? Because again, we started this conversation where 35 years ago, you were already playing with these ideas. Going through the process most recently, what surprised you? What did you learn? Or what did you solidify in kind of going through the process of giving all this stuff words?
Well, the real shock for me was 23 years ago when I first saw a tapping demonstration, how quickly these neural pathways can be transformed. At the time, I didn't know that there were neural pathways, but long-standing behaviors and emotions could be transformed in the space of a relatively short session. And that for me was a game changer because the personal mythology model was popular. I used to have full workshops at Esalen. I do that once a year, and then I get invited to go to many places, and it speeded it up. It speeded it up a lot. So even though it had been popular and successful, it wasn't as powerful as it could have been. So bringing the tapping in to working with personal myths was a powerful step that totally surprised me. And in the 23 years since, everything has confirmed that, yes, this really is as good as it seems. And so that's the best surprise.
As oftentimes when I'm like introducing tapping to people for the first time, just the nitty gritty, whatever, it's like tapping is an accelerant. Whatever tool that you're currently using that is working for you, don't change a thing and just take one free hand and tap while you're doing that particular thing. And whatever is there, it's going to give us this opportunity to multiply it as we step into it in that particular way.
Yes. I think it really turbocharges the more conventional techniques that psychology has to offer.
And so then as you finish this, what are the questions that still feel open-ended at this point as you continue to explore the way the brain works, what transformation looks like, how we facilitate transformation in a more long-lasting, deeper, powerful, safer way? Like what's the question that's now at the front of your mind, or the thing that you're leaning into that makes you excited to continue to try and figure out to develop even more?
Right. Well, the research has come a long way, so that we have 200 clinical trials in English-speaking journals and another 100 in non-English-speaking journals that show that this works, that there are statistically significant improvements. However, the research could be stronger. We could use more meta-analyses. We could use more studies with larger N's, more people. So there's all of that, but that doesn't particularly interest me. What I think is going to happen with that is that as the skeptics in the psychological community come up against this, they're going to, kind of try to disprove it, and they're going to see it works. And so I think that the conventional institutions are going to continue to study this more and more. And I think that's not where we need to put our focus. Where we need to put our focus is on improving practitioners. And there are ways to research, to do research that really translates into stronger practitioners. So I think that, for instance, we could take a dozen of the top practitioners in the field and do what's called a Delphi study, where you interview them around a particular question. So how do you treat obsessive compulsive disorder? And you really get a consensus on how, and you see the differences on how best to approach a very difficult clinical situation. That's one of the things. Another way of doing that kind of research is, again, with some top practitioners, is to videotape their sessions and look for the choice points, for the critical incidents where they had to make an intervention that would keep the client engaged and keep the client on a positive track. And what are the generalizations we can learn from that research? So those are two things. The third thing is to take that a step further and teach clinicians how to recognize where the choice points are. And so that the clinician now is doing the research by self-observing and paying attention to where the therapy becomes less engaged and where it becomes more engaged. And so the research now is not just outsiders looking in, but it's training the therapist to think in a process-oriented way. So that's where I think the energy psychology field could really improve itself, because my hope is that even though the membership of ASAP is slowly increasing, it's slow. That in the coming years, I think there's going to be an explosion of people that want to learn this, and that we should be able to meet them with best practices, with the best training possible, so that the learning curve is minimized. So that's where I'd like to see the field go.
And you're speaking my language. I appreciate the sentiment 25, 30 years ago about try it on anything, but in a lot of ways, looking back, it kind of looks like Civil War medicine, where it was just lots of people trying lots of things and it didn't work out as well as it could. And the fact that we're now in a circumstance where we're asking the questions about not only how do we equip people to do something in their daily lives, but the folks that are dealing with really complex trauma and really big issues, making sure that they're well formed, and for me, that's twofold: well formed, where everything that you're talking about, where we're doing things in the best practice way, but also making sure we're doing it in a way that is safe. And making sure that, but one of the great lessons that, I learned from Ulf and Gunilla and all of the amazing work of the Peaceful Heart Network is, how do we go into a circumstance where we're not re-traumatizing someone when we don't have the infrastructure to do it? Let's create a tool set and a protocol that is really, really effective, but is also really, really safe. And so the fact that you're seeing the need for and wanting to champion this idea of us being more professional, safer, and all of that sort of stuff, just is going to be good for all of us. And it also gives us all more credibility. when we're in a circumstance where things are being done well and we're not able to point to some unformed person who creates a bad reputation for the field and the tool set. And so I'm glad that that's something that's in front of your mind. Well, awesome, David. Well, as always, I so appreciate your time. But even more so, I appreciate your insight and how deeply that you continue to think about all of this. I know from our conversations in the past and your history of kind of like going, I wonder if anything here is very, very useful, and being surprised by the transformation and all of that, and embracing that as someone who's a lifelong learner. Like that means a lot to know that not only are you doing good work, but you're also in a circumstance where you're growing inside of that. And so thank you for sharing all of that with us today.
Thank you, Gene. It's really a pleasure. And I so want to salute the work you're doing, the 24-hour, but also the amazing resources that you bring into the community. I just think your website, your regular conversations with people have just really elevated the consciousness of the tapping community so much.
If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.